Stop questioning my decisions. You don't get a say in them. My boyfriend said that to me on an ordinary Tuesday night, standing in our kitchen with a wine glass in his hand, the glow from the overhead light catching the edge of his jaw like some dramatic movie shot. Except this wasn't a movie. This was my life. Our life. Or at least I thought it was ours. I remember sitting at the table, hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of tea, staring at him as those words sank in. Not shouted, not thrown in anger, just calmly delivered, like a fact. You don't get a say in them. He had just told me he'd put down a non-refundable deposit on a wedding venue I'd never seen. $3,000. On a place he chose alone, in a city I wasn't even sure I wanted to get married in. I'd asked the most reasonable question I could think of. Why didn't you tell me you were doing this? And he'd shrugged. Because I knew you'd overthink it. Someone had to make a decision. It's our wedding, I'd said. Don't you think I should have at least seen the place? He barely looked up from his phone. I'm an adult. I don't need your permission for every decision I make. I'm an adult too, I'd answered, heart thudding. That's why we should be making these decisions together. That was when he finally looked at me, really looked at me, and said it. Stop questioning my decisions. You don't get a say in them. He walked away after that, took his wine and left me sitting at the table with the taste of those words in my mouth like metal. The bedroom door closed with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam. I stared at that door for a long time before whispering to the empty room, good to know. Something shifted in me that night. If he didn't want me involved in decisions, fine, I wouldn't be involved. But that also meant he didn't get to be involved in mine. So the next morning, I started making calls. Quietly, calmly, deliberately. And days later, when he found out what I'd done, when he realized everyone else knew before he did, his reaction was pure shock. He'd told me I didn't get a say, so I believed him. And then I made the biggest decision of my life without him. Before that night, in late September, I would have told you I had a stable life. At 29, working remotely in software consulting, engaged to a man I thought I'd marry, living in a 2-bedroom apartment downtown we'd chosen together. Everything looked right. On paper, we were the couple people pointed to and said, they have it figured out. Ethan and I met 4 years ago at a mutual friend's game night. He was charming, sharp, polished, the kind of man who always knew exactly what to say to make people laugh. I liked his ambition. I liked his confidence. I liked the way he made plans easily, decisively, with no hesitation. It felt grounding to someone like me who tended to overthink everything. He worked in marketing and loved the fast pace of it, loved talking about campaigns, deadlines, office politics, his path toward becoming a director one day. I admired that drive. He used to say he admired my calm in contrast, that I balanced him out, kept things stable. Back then, the cracks were too small to notice. When we moved in together after 8 months of engagement, I thought we were merging our lives. He picked the neighborhood. I picked the layout. We painted the living room together and argued about furniture in a way that felt cute, harmless. Those early months of cohabitation were filled with movie nights, slow breakfasts, and weekend errands that made me feel like we were building something real. But looking back, the imbalance was already there, just quieter. He made plans quickly, impulsively, assuming I'd follow. Dinner with his coworkers, trips with his family, hosting game nights. I used to tell myself, he's a planner. It's just who he is. And besides, I loved him. I didn't mind adjusting. But then came the decisions that weren't simply preferences. They were life choices. He'd book a vacation without checking my work schedule. He'd invite his parents to stay for 2 weeks without asking if I was okay with guests. He signed us up for an expensive gym membership because it's good for us, even though I hated gyms and preferred running outside. When I tried to bring it up, gently, reasonably, he'd brush me off with a casual, I don't need permission for every little thing. That word, permission, always hit wrong. I wasn't trying to control him. I just wanted to be consulted about decisions that affected both of us. But Ethan didn't see it that way. He saw it as me questioning him. He saw it as unnecessary noise. He saw it as me slowing him down. At first, I internalized it. Maybe I really was overthinking. Maybe he was right. Someone needed to take the lead, and he was better at it than me. I'm analytical, detail-oriented, cautious. He's decisive, fast-moving, confident. We joked that together we made one highly functional adult. But the longer we lived together, the more the joke stopped being funny. Every time he made another unilateral decision, something in me tightened. A small knot, barely noticeable, until it wasn't small anymore. Our families saw the difference too. My parents adored him at first. He was polite, composed, the type of man they thought would take care of me. But over time, my mother began offering me quiet glances after certain interactions. A slight frown here, a concerned question there. "Are you happy?" she'd ask softly. "I'm fine," I'd reply. Fine, the word women use when the truth is too tangled to unpack. Even his own father once mentioned casually, "Ethan can be a bit headstrong. Don't let him steamroll you." I laughed it off. I shouldn't have, but I loved him, and love makes you justify the beginnings of things you should never excuse. The truth is, the night he told me I didn't get a say wasn't the moment everything fell apart. It was simply the moment the quiet pieces finally aligned, and I could no longer pretend I didn't see the whole picture. If I'm honest, the unraveling didn't begin with the wedding deposit. It didn't begin with the venue, or the gym membership, or the surprise visits from his parents. The unraveling began long before that, in the quiet, everyday moments, when Ethan started treating shared life like it was his life, and I was simply orbiting around it. The first time I truly felt it was a small thing. He came home one evening and said, "By the way, we're going to my cousin's engagement dinner next Saturday." I blinked. "Next Saturday? Ethan, that's the same weekend I'm supposed to help my sister move." He waved a hand dismissively. "Cancel. This is more important." I remember standing there, feeling my stomach drop. "I already promised her," I said. "Then unpromise," he replied. "Nora, don't make this complicated." That phrase, "don't make this complicated," became his favorite tool, a way to shut down any disagreement by framing me as the problem. But things escalated gradually, like watching water warm without noticing it's about to boil. Then came the bachelor party trip. I had told him months earlier that I needed that weekend off. My brother had asked me to help with planning and logistics. Ethan nodded at the time, saying it was fine, and we'd work around it. Except he didn't work around anything. On a Thursday evening, he walked into the living room holding his laptop. "So I booked us a 4-day vacation next month," he announced proudly. "When next month?" I asked. He turned the screen toward me. "The first weekend." My chest tightened. "Ethan, that's the bachelor party weekend." He shrugged. "Move it." "I can't just move it, Ethan. It's not my event." He stared at me like I was being unreasonable. "Then skip it. You don't have to be everywhere, Nora. I told you about this months ago." He sighed, a long, theatrical sigh that made me feel like I was inconveniencing him. "See? This is why I didn't run it by you," he said. "You always find problems." "I don't find problems," I replied quietly. "I just want you to talk to me before planning things for both of us." He rolled his eyes. "It's exhausting having to check every little thing." But it wasn't every little thing. It was big things, important things, our life. Yet he acted like involving me was optional. Then he began referring to decisions as his responsibilities. One night while we were cooking, he said, "I booked the caterer today." I froze mid-stir. "For the wedding?" "Obviously." "What menu did you pick?" "Does it matter?" he said casually. "Yes," I said. "Of course it matters." He barely glanced at me. "I picked the chicken. Everyone likes chicken." "I'm allergic to the sauce in most chicken marinades," I reminded him. He laughed. Actually laughed. "You'll survive. There will be other desserts." "I'm talking about the entree," I said stiffly. He shrugged. "You're overreacting again." But I wasn't. I was slowly realizing I wasn't part of the we he loved talking about with his friends. He made decisions like he was single. He communicated like consulting me was a burden. He reacted like partnership meant obedience. The atmosphere in our apartment changed. Not loud, not dramatic, just tense, heavy, a quiet disappointment settling under my skin. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. How he never asked for my opinion unless he'd already made up his mind. How he'd call decisions ours only when they were his ideas. How he labeled my concerns as nagging, micromanaging, or drama. And slowly the truth grew impossible to silence. Ethan didn't want a partner. He wanted an accessory, someone who supported him while he chose everything that shaped our future. The seed of conflict wasn't planted the night he told me I didn't get a say. It was planted every time he acted like my voice was optional. Every time he minimized my feelings. Every time he dismissed my concerns. By the time we reached the kitchen table conversation, the roots of this conflict had already grown deep, tangled through every part of our relationship. I just hadn't realized it until that night. The night everything finally shifted had started out strangely quiet. I'd been working at the kitchen table, finishing a late client call, when Ethan walked in holding a glass of red wine, humming softly. He looked relaxed, too relaxed for someone who had just spent $3,000 without telling me. "I have good news," he said, leaning against the counter. I closed my laptop slowly. "What news?" He took a sip, savoring it like he was about to reveal something wonderful. "I booked our wedding venue." My spine stiffened. "You what?" "Yeah," he said casually, pulling out his phone. "Non-refundable deposit and everything. We're locked in." My heart dropped into my stomach. "Wait, you booked it already? Without me?" He frowned, as if I were ruining the moment. "Nora, I sent you the link last month." "You sent me a link," I corrected. "You said you were just browsing. I didn't know you were planning to put down a deposit." He shrugged. "Someone had to make a decision." I stared at him, trying to stay calm. "Ethan, this is our wedding. How could you commit to a venue I've never even seen?" He finally looked up from his phone, expression flat. "I knew you'd overthink it, so I handled it." "That's not fair," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Choosing a venue isn't a small detail. It's a huge decision. We were supposed to do this together." He let out a long sigh, the kind he used when he was tired of listening. "Nora, stop making this dramatic. I picked a nice place. Just be happy." "I'm not upset about the venue," I said, pressing a hand to my chest. "I'm upset that you didn't talk to me. Again." He rolled his eyes. "Here we go." My throat tightened. "Ethan, I'm serious. I feel like you're making all the decisions without me. Big ones, important ones, decisions that affect both of us." He slammed his wine glass down a little too hard. "I don't need your permission for everything." "That's not what I'm saying," I whispered. "I'm saying I want to be part of the process. I want this wedding to be ours, not just yours." He stared at me with that cold, dismissive look, the one he used when he'd already mentally checked out of the conversation. "Oh my God, Nora," he said. "Stop questioning my decisions. You don't get a say in them." The room went silent. For a moment, I genuinely wasn't sure I had heard him correctly. My ears rang. My pulse thudded. The overhead light flickered softly, the only sound in the room. "I don't get a say?" I finally asked. He shrugged, unbothered. "Not in every little thing, no. You stress too much. I'm better at making these choices." I felt something fracture inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically. Split cleanly, like glass under slow pressure finally giving way. "I'm your fiancée," I said quietly, "not a bystander." "You're making this exhausting," he replied, grabbing his glass again. "Just let me handle things." He turned away. Not an apology, not a conversation, not even acknowledgement of how deeply he'd just cut me. Just dismissal. I stared at the back of his head, my hands trembling in my lap. The man I thought I'd marry had just told me, calmly, clearly, that my voice didn't matter in the marriage we were planning. And worse, he believed he was right. I sat there for a long time, the weight of his words settling into me like sediment. The soft whir of the refrigerator filled the silence. My tea had gone cold hours ago. The apartment suddenly felt foreign, like a place I was visiting instead of a home I helped build. Finally, I whispered to the empty room, "Good to know." He didn't hear me, but the part of me that had been quiet for too long did. Something shifted that night, quiet but irreversible. He had shown me exactly where I stood. And now, without raising my voice, without another argument, without another wasted plea for partnership, I would show him exactly what that meant. That night, after Ethan disappeared into the bedroom and shut the door behind him, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the wood grain as if it could somehow explain how my life had shifted in a single sentence. "You don't get a say in them." It echoed in my chest, hollow and sharp, like someone knocking on the inside of my ribs. I wasn't furious, not yet. Instead, I felt a strange, icy stillness, the kind that comes right before the first crack forms in something fragile. I stood up slowly, walked to the sink, and poured the untouched tea down the drain. My hands were trembling, but my mind was unusually clear, too clear. I didn't go to the bedroom. I didn't follow him. I didn't beg for a conversation he'd likely dismiss anyway. Instead, I sat on the couch, pulled my knees to my chest, and hugged myself because he certainly wasn't going to. I replayed the evening again and again. Someone had to make a decision. You overthink everything. Just be happy. You don't get a say. The dismissal wasn't new, but the bluntness was. Somewhere between the venue deposit and his cold tone, an uncomfortable truth took shape. Ethan didn't see me as an equal partner. He saw me as someone who existed to support his decisions, not participate in them. The realization landed softly but heavily, like a snowfall that becomes a blizzard only when you finally open the door and see how much has accumulated. Around midnight, I finally stood up. The hallway light glowed faintly under the bedroom door. I considered knocking. I considered apologizing even though I hadn't done anything wrong, a habit women learn too well. Instead, I whispered again, mostly to myself, "Good to know." The next morning, I woke before Ethan. Not because I had slept well, I barely slept at all, but because I couldn't stay in bed pretending everything was normal. The apartment felt different, like the air itself knew something foundational had shifted. Ethan walked into the kitchen rubbing his eyes, hair tousled, looking like nothing significant had happened. "Morning," he said casually. I looked up. "Morning." "You're quiet," he said, opening the fridge. I forced a small nod. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask how I felt. He didn't bring up the conversation from the night before. He simply grabbed yogurt and a spoon, ate half of it, then tossed the container in the trash without rinsing it. Normal, routine, completely unaffected. It hit me harder than the argument. I studied him for a moment, this man I'd planned a future with, and wondered how long he had been living in a separate world from mine. He finally noticed me watching and frowned. "What?" "Nothing," I said gently, "just thinking." He shrugged, kissed the top of my head like everything was fine, and headed for the shower. And that was the moment I made my decision. He didn't want me involved in decisions? Fine. But that also meant he wouldn't be involved in mine. He had given me the rule. I was simply going to follow it. The first call I made was the easiest, my former landlord. "Hi, Mr. Jenkins. It's Nora. Do you happen to have any one-bedroom units opening soon?" He paused. "Well, actually, one's becoming available November 1st. "I'll take it," I said, before the fear could catch up to me. He sounded surprised, but pleased. "I'll email you the lease." I signed it within hours. No hesitation, no second-guessing. The second call was to my brother. "Hey," I said, "about your bachelor party." "You handling it?" he asked. "I'm in. I'll take care of everything." He cheered. "You're the best, sis. Can't wait." He didn't know I'd just begun quietly separating my life from the one Ethan controlled. The third call was to the wedding venue. "Hi," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'd like to ask about your cancellation policy." When the coordinator said I could get 50% back if I canceled within a certain window, I wrote down the date carefully. I hung up and stared at my phone for a long time, feeling a strange mix of grief and empowerment. That night, I came home, and Ethan was on the couch, flipping through wedding magazines. "I found floral designs I love," he said, smiling as if nothing had changed. I nodded. "That's nice." He didn't notice the shift in my tone, the emotional distance expanding like a quiet canyon between us. He didn't ask what I thought. Of course he didn't. And for the first time, instead of feeling invisible, I felt free. Free to act, free to choose, free to reclaim my voice in the only way he would ever understand, by following his rule and making my decisions alone. After that night at the kitchen table, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply shifted, quietly, steadily, into someone Ethan couldn't recognize. Someone who no longer pushed for partnership where partnership wasn't offered. He had said I didn't get a say in decisions, so I stopped giving one. The next 2 weeks became a study in emotional distance. Ethan kept barreling forward with wedding plans, making decisions as though I were a silent intern, shadowing his life. He'd wave swatches of fabric in front of me. "I'm thinking these colors for the bridesmaid dresses." "Looks nice," I'd say. He'd show me a photographer's Instagram. "This is the one I booked." "Great choice," I'd reply. He'd announce honeymoon ideas like magazine headlines, "Maldives," or maybe Santorini. "The photos will be stunning." "Sounds wonderful," I'd murmur. At first, he seemed pleased, almost triumphant, like he'd finally gotten the obedient, low-maintenance fiancée he wanted. But then something in his expression began to shift. Curiosity, then confusion, then irritation. One night, as he spread wedding contracts across the kitchen table, he looked up sharply. "You're being weird," he said. I glanced up from my laptop. "Weird how?" "You're not engaging." I paused. "You told me you didn't need my input." His jaw tightened. "Not for small stuff, but you can still be supportive." I closed my laptop slowly. "I am being supportive. You make the decisions. I'm agreeing with them." He didn't like that answer. His face twitched, as if my calmness was more upsetting than any argument could ever be. Meanwhile, I'd begun quietly extracting myself from the life he assumed I was committed to. I transferred money from our joint account into my personal one. Small, legal amounts that wouldn't trigger suspicion but would protect me financially. I removed my name from the utilities, leaving everything in his. Changed my direct deposit at work. Every step was a thread quietly pulled from the fabric of our shared life, making it thinner, weaker. He didn't notice a thing, because he didn't look, because he never checked. because in his mind I was just there, an accessory to his plans. The bachelor party trip arrived in early October. When I told him what weekend I'd be gone, he didn't even look up from his laptop. "Have fun," he said, flipping a page in his binder. He didn't ask where I was going. He didn't ask who would be there. He didn't ask what the plans were. For a man who accused me of overthinking everything, he never seemed to think about me at all. The bachelor weekend was the first time in months I felt something close to freedom. Surrounded by my brother and friends, laughing around a campfire, singing off-key karaoke, drinking too much bourbon, the tension I'd been carrying began to loosen. My brother pulled me aside one night. "Are you okay?" he asked. I hesitated. "Not really." He nodded slowly. "Thought so. Something's been off with him for a while." Hearing someone else say it out loud was both painful and validating. When I returned home Sunday night, I found Ethan sitting on the couch, scrolling through bridesmaid dress options on his laptop. "How was it?" he asked casually. "Good," I said. "That's it?" I shrugged. "Yeah, good." He stared at me for a moment, waiting for me to elaborate, to offer details I no longer felt obligated to share. Eventually, he rolled his eyes and went back to his laptop. But something in his expression told me he finally sensed it, the emotional chasm widening between us. By mid-October, I had quietly moved half my belongings out of the apartment. Books, winter clothes, some kitchen items that had been mine before we moved in together, my old gaming console from college. He didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't want to notice. But the saddest part wasn't his obliviousness. It was knowing that the man I was supposed to marry didn't even look closely enough at our home to realize it was slowly emptying. One afternoon, I stood in our bedroom holding a box of my sweaters, staring at the half-full closet. If I disappeared entirely, how long would it take for him to realize? A day, a week, longer? The answer scared me more than leaving ever could. On October 18th, exactly 31 days after he told me I didn't get a say, I made the most symbolic move of all. I called the wedding venue and canceled the booking. The woman on the phone pulled up our file. "You're within the partial refund period. We'll return $1,500 to the original card." My card. The card I'd quietly opened in my name only. When the email confirmation chimed into my inbox, I stared at it for a long time. Half the deposit lost, half regained. A perfect metaphor for our relationship. Half investment, half waste. I canceled the photographer next, then the caterer, then anything else tied to my name. A few vendors required both signatures, but most didn't. Ethan had assumed I'd never check the contracts. He was wrong. Every cancellation was a small breath of air into lungs that had been compressed for months. When I got home, Ethan was at the table again, wedding binder open. "I picked your tuxedo," he said brightly. "Midnight blue. Classic." "That's nice," I replied softly. He didn't realize everything had already begun to unravel. Not because I'd sabotaged the wedding, but because he'd removed me from it long before I ever took action. All I had done was follow the rule he gave me. And now the escalation, the real escalation, was only moments away. October 23rd started like any other Saturday, except for the tightening in my chest. The kind you get when you know something irreversible is about to happen. The apartment was quiet. Ethan had gone for his morning run, leaving the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the hallway. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by half-packed boxes, my dishes, my cookware, the mugs I'd bought years before we even met. Objects that suddenly felt like they belonged to a stranger's home. I taped another box shut, the sound sharp in the stillness. For the first time in weeks, the truth hit me with full force. I was leaving a life I spent years building. And despite everything Ethan had done, it still hurt. Not because I wanted to stay, but because letting go of a dream is its own kind of grief. I was lifting a stack of plates when the front door opened. Ethan stepped inside, sweat dampening his shirt. At first, he didn't see the boxes. He kicked off his shoes, grabbed a water bottle from the fridge, took a long drink. Then he finally turned around and froze. What are you doing?" he asked, his voice suddenly small. "Packing," I said simply. He blinked like the word physically stung him. "Packing what?" I looked around at the half-empty shelves. My things. His eyes darted from box to box. "Why?" I set one plate down gently, almost tenderly, because my hands were shaking. "I'm moving out." The silence that followed felt like someone had sucked all the air out of the room. He stepped forward. "Moving out where?" "A new apartment." "When?" His voice rose in pitch. "November 1st. I held his gaze. "I signed the lease last month." "Last month?" He choked on the words. I nodded. "You've been planning this for a month?" he demanded. About that, I said. His expression fractured. Shock, disbelief, anger flickering across his face like a breaking storm. And you didn't think to tell me? I paused, then repeated his own words back to him, gently but unmistakably. Stop questioning my decisions. You don't get a say in them. The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, the weight of his own sentence hitting him for the first time. He replayed that moment in his head. I saw it. The night in the kitchen. The wine glass. The tone he'd used. That's not the same thing, he finally stammered. Isn't it? I asked softly. He looked around the apartment like the room was collapsing around him. You're my fiancée, he whispered. We're supposed to get married. Were we? I said. Because for the past month you've been planning a wedding I wasn't part of. His breathing quickened. Nora, I picked the venue because you take too long to decide things. I handled the caterer because you were busy. I chose the tux because you didn't care. I stopped caring, I corrected. After you told me my voice didn't matter. He wiped a hand over his face. We could have talked about this. I laughed, not out of humor, but heartbreak. Every time I tried to talk, you shut me down. Every time I wanted to be included, you told me I was overthinking. You didn't want a partner, Ethan. You wanted control. He clenched his fists, shaking. So that's it? You're just leaving? Just like that, I said. His voice cracked. What about the wedding? I picked up my phone and opened my email. Here, I said, holding it out. The venue cancellation, the caterer, the photographer, everything you did without me, undone. He grabbed the phone, scrolling frantically. You canceled the venue? His voice broke. We lost money. You lost money, I corrected. You put it on your card. You made that choice. He stared at me with something close to rage. Everyone got to save the dates. What am I supposed to tell people? I shrugged. That's your decision to make. I don't get a say in it, remember? He let out a sound, not quite a yell, but something raw and wounded. Then he whispered, Nora, please, don't do this. For the first time in years, I looked at him without fear, without hope, without excuses. There's nothing left to fix, I said. You broke the partnership long before I walked away. His shoulders sagged, and he sank onto the couch, the same couch where he'd planned our wedding alone, and buried his face in his hands. Watching him fall apart should have hurt more than it did. But rock bottom often feels strangely quiet. That was my dark moment, not the sadness of leaving him, but the realization that I had already left emotionally weeks before. The hours after our confrontation felt strangely suspended, as if the apartment itself was holding its breath. Ethan stayed on the couch with his head in his hands, muttering fragments of disbelief. I stayed in the doorway of our bedroom, leaning against the frame, my fingers brushing the chipped paint I used to complain about. For the first time in our relationship, I felt no urge to comfort him. Not because I wanted him hurt, but because I finally understood something vital. If I soothed the consequences of his actions, he would never recognize them as consequences at all. That realization, quiet, steady, liberating, was the true beginning of my turning point. Ethan followed me with his eyes when I picked up one last box of clothes. You're actually leaving, he whispered. I am. You didn't even try to fix this, he said bitterly. I turned to him, my voice calm. I tried for years. You ignored it. Tonight you noticed because the consequences finally reached you. His jaw tightened. So this is revenge? I shook my head. No, this is alignment. He scoffed. What does that even mean? It means, I said softly, you taught me the rules you wanted our relationship to run on. You said you made decisions alone. I simply applied that logic to my own life. He stared at me, stunned by the simplicity of it. For once, the silence didn't crush me. It clarified me. The days that followed came with their own waves of fallout, but they also came with unexpected clarity. The first person I told was my brother. He picked up on the first ring. You okay? His voice was already protective. I'm leaving him, I said. There was barely a pause. Good. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. You're not surprised. Nora, he said gently, none of us are. Pain flickered. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right. And because I had been the last to see it. He listened as I explained the timeline, the cancellations, the boxes, the venue refund. When I finished, he said quietly, I'm proud of you. I nearly cried right then. Not because of Ethan, but because of myself. Telling my parents was harder. My mom cried, quietly, heartbreakingly. Not because she liked Ethan, but because she had seen me trying so hard for something that had been failing from the inside. My dad was silent for a long time before finally saying, I'm sorry you had to carry so much alone. Something inside me cracked at that, in a good way. in a healing way, in a finally someone sees me way. Meanwhile, the wedding unwound behind the scenes like a pulled thread unraveling a sweater. The venue refund hit my card. The photographer and caterer confirmed cancellations. Emails flooded in with polite regret. Ethan didn't see those emails. I didn't forward them. He didn't ask. His silence wasn't peace this time. It was shock drowning in denial. Packing for my new apartment became a ritual of rediscovery. Each item I wrapped, a mug, a book, a blanket, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. My life wasn't collapsing. It was reorganizing. And the moment everything clicked into place came on a quiet Wednesday morning. I was standing in the empty second bedroom, the room Ethan once wanted to turn into a future office for himself, when I caught my reflection in the window. I looked tired, hollow-eyed, but there was something else. A steadiness I hadn't seen in years. A recognition that I no longer felt small. A truth I had earned through heartbreak, clarity, and action. I wasn't leaving because I failed at loving him. I was leaving because I succeeded at loving myself. And suddenly, everything made sense. The boxes, the cancellations, the conversations, the goodbye note I knew he'd eventually leave. My life wasn't ending. It was beginning again. This time on my terms. With my voice. With my say. With decisions I didn't have to justify or soften or apologize for. There are moments in a woman's life when the ground beneath her shifts and she chooses not to fall. This was mine. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It was a whisper, a breath, a choice. I choose myself. And the world, my world, began to rearrange itself around that truth. Moving day arrived sooner than I expected. November 1st, bright, crisp, quiet. The kind of morning that feels like a fresh page. My brother and my college best friend showed up early, both wearing hoodies and determined expressions, ready to help me close a chapter that had dragged on far too long. Ethan wasn't home. He'd already gone to stay with his parents for the week. Part of me wondered if he left because he didn't want to see me go, or because facing the truth was simply too heavy for him. As we packed the last box into the truck, my friend nudged me. "You okay?" I looked at the apartment building one last time, the windows we'd once decorated with holiday lights, the balcony where we'd had late-night talks about futures that now felt fictional. "I will be," I said, and I meant it. Inside the apartment, Ethan had left me a note on the counter. Just one sentence. "We could have fixed this." I stared at the words. Neat handwriting, a small smudge where his pen had hesitated. But we couldn't have, and deep down he knew it. Fixing it would have required him to treat me like a partner. Fixing it would have required him to see the damage long before I walked away. Fixing it would have required respect, something he only offered when he feared losing me. I folded the note and placed it back where I found it. Some things didn't need to be taken into the new life I was building. The fallout began almost immediately. His mother called first. "How could you do this to him?" she demanded the moment I picked up. "To him?" I repeated, stunned. "You blindsided him. You embarrassed the entire family with those cancellations. What will people think?" I kept my voice steady. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I explained the situation to Ethan multiple times. He chose not to hear me." She scoffed. "You young people just give up so easily." "My decision wasn't easy," I said softly. "It just became necessary." She hung up without another word. 10 minutes later, his father called. His voice was quieter. "Nora, I'm sorry. I love my son, but I know how he can be." The pressure behind my eyes almost broke me. "Thank you," I whispered. "I hope someday he learns from this," his father added. "You deserve better." My own parents reacted differently. My mom cried softly. My dad hugged me so tightly I felt my ribs shift. They didn't question my decision. They questioned how long I endured the imbalance. "You were carrying the whole relationship," my mother said. "No one can do that forever." Maybe that was true. Maybe I had been holding up everything alone. Maybe losing someone is easier to face than realizing how long you settled for less than you deserved. Friends took sides. Some were angry at me. "You blindsided him," they said. Some were angry at him. "She told you for years what she needed," they said. Some stayed silent, which said enough. And some, unexpectedly, reached out with honesty. "I saw how he talked over you. He made everything about him. You didn't look happy anymore. You're brave." I didn't feel brave, not yet, but hearing it helped. As for Ethan, the reality hit him harder than he ever expected. Our finances were separate now. His parents' disappointment weighed on him. His friends were questioning his version of events. The wedding cancellations had spread through our social circles. He texted once, a long, spiraling message. "I get it now. I understand. I pushed too hard. I didn't listen. I was stressed. I messed up. We can fix this. Please don't disappear from my life. I read it twice. Not because I was considering going back, but because a small part of me grieved how different things could have been if he had spoken these words a year ago, or two, or any time before I had to make decisions alone. I put the phone down without replying. Healing isn't about reopening wounds to comfort the person who caused them. Healing is choosing not to. At my new apartment, sunlight poured into the living room like a promise. My brother carried in a final box and wiped his forehead. "You look lighter," he said. My best friend smirked. "Escape looks good on you." I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, but a real one. Full, bright, unfamiliar. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself. The Nora I had been before Ethan's decisions overshadowed my own. The Nora who didn't apologize for having a voice. The Nora who didn't shrink to fit someone else's comfort. The fallout wasn't just falling on Ethan. It was falling off of me. And I was finally free to step out from under it. My apartment isn't luxurious. The floors creak in certain spots. The kitchen tiles are uneven. The windows whistle when the wind is strong. But it's mine, entirely mine. And in the quiet after the storm, that means more than any venue deposit, any save-the-date cards, any expensive wedding plan that never truly belonged to both of us. The first night I slept here, I woke up expecting the familiar weight of dread in my chest, the one I'd gotten used to carrying for months. Instead, I felt a strange, peaceful stillness, a sense of space inside my ribs that hadn't existed in a long time. Healing didn't arrive in a dramatic moment. It came in pieces. In the first morning, I made coffee without rushing. In the first evening, I arranged my books on shelves Ethan never touched. In the first laugh that didn't feel forced. In the first breath that didn't require permission. One day, while hanging a painting, I paused and realized something. I no longer felt like I was disappearing. I no longer felt small. I no longer felt like someone living inside someone else's life. I felt present, awake, mine again. As winter approached, my work improved. My friendships grew stronger. I had dinners with my family without feeling the need to defend my relationship. My creativity returned, something that had quietly vanished under the weight of constantly being minimized. Occasionally, I'd hear through friends that Ethan was dating again, but already falling into the same patterns, making decisions alone, ignoring boundaries, expecting obedience instead of partnership. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel bitterness. I felt distance, the emotional kind that protects you rather than hardens you. One evening, while talking to a woman I'd met casually for coffee, she asked what my deal breakers were. I didn't hesitate. Anyone who doesn't value partnership, I said. Anyone who makes decisions alone about things meant to be shared. Anyone who doesn't see me as an equal. She nodded with understanding, and that was the moment I realized just how much I had grown. Here's what I learned. When someone tells you who they are, when they show you how little your voice matters to them, believe them. And when someone says you don't get a say in decisions that shape your life, walk away. Make your own decisions. Build a life where your voice isn't just allowed, it's respected, cherished, heard. You are not hard to love. You are simply asking to be treated like a partner. And the right person will never make you apologize for that.